Hello, welcome to the moon bath, where we chat about what's on our screens by the digital moonlight. Right? Something like that. So this week on the news cycle, there's been a lot going on as always, but I'm just gonna talk about the general strike. That's probably one of the key things that came up this week. That from the payday report that the May Day general strike movement continues to grow. So there was a general strike in Minneapolis, throughout the country, but kind of started in Minneapolis because of all the ICE stuff, because Gestapo ICE stuff. Of killers and on the loose, and like that worked out pretty well. One of the then there's also the King's protest that happened recently. That was also a really good turnout, one of the bigger protests of the recent memory. And so people are organizing. Unions are joining in on another general strike happening on May 1st. That's May Day, and I think that's a good thing that we got to keep on doing. And this article here, one of the organizers talks about how like it's good to build up muscle memory. So to do these strikes more often, because really like a one-day strike isn't as effective as maybe a multi-day strike, or perhaps even other actions we can do. But it brings awareness to a lot of people, understand, and it's part of like halting the economy, right? Using the power as working people. The only power we have is to withhold our labor, so the idea is to like do it on May Day, and then build up more momentum to perhaps continue to do it. Maybe like every season we do a strike, and then they talk about also like how leading up to the midterm election. This is for the U.S., by the way, but I think worldwide we can participate in a strike against just imperialism or capitalism in general. And yeah, so then like there's gonna part of like the plan from the administration right now is to instill fear with putting ICE workers throughout scaring people and kidnapping people, and then also like putting them in the airports and stuff recently. And there's talks and ideas that like perhaps there's going to be ICE at another border patrol at poll sites for elections, and that's a scary scenario that is meant to intimidate and perhaps bar black and brown folk from participating in democracy, so under the guise of like, oh, we're protecting democracy by making sure that it's only legal citizens, and then they define it as like basic, like if you look if you're white passing, then they'll probably won't bother you, right? So that's the idea. So it's like we can build up this muscle memory to do more strikes leading up to the midterms, and maybe then there's enough people that can fight back against this, and hopefully we can maintain some hold on the limited democracy we do have. But I think strikes are important, like I said, with holding our labor power, and I think really like eventually we should probably like, I think like a more effective strike would be like a 5-day strike. Like imagine like going on strike for a whole work week. I think that would be more detrimental to the big wigs. They'll definitely hit them in the pocketbook. And so that's something important, I think. So like, it's a good heads up. It's about a month away, to prepare for that upcoming. But yeah, so yeah, not like it's every week. I've been doing this and like these streams, and what I talk about just depends on like what's been going on, of course, and what's in my mind. But some weeks, like this week, I have been not on the socials as much. So like, I don't know if there's too much I can talk about every week, and I feel like this is not a place to go too in depth with the news and stuff. It's mostly just like a hangout spot to discuss what I've been watching and what I've been up to and seeing in the world through the digital screen light. But there's some cool stuff out there. Look at this thing, God's Teeth. That's a cool little art piece. Good to see civil disobedience going on. This transgender lawmaker defies the bathroom ban act by going to the bathroom, and she wasn't arrested, but they're like looking into it. I don't know if she's going to be arrested, but because they passed a law there where you can only go to the bathroom that's based on the sex you were assigned at birth, and more censorship stuff going on. Here's a cute little thing. But yeah, that was the major thing that I wanted to bring to light, the general strike. So let's get into what I've been watching these days. So I was like, I've been on my literary kick, watching like literary adaptations of literature. And then I was curious about, I was listening to, I finished up the Silmarillion on audiobook, and then I'm starting reading The Hobbit now, and like I was like reading about Tolkien and stuff, and then I was like thinking about fairies and stuff, because I was like watching some, I think it's like Jess of the Shire. She has a good channel about Tolkien, and like and she was talking about like the origins of fairies and elves and stuff, and so I got into a mood to watch something about fairies and stuff, as I do. And so then I was thinking, I'm not as familiar with Shakespeare as I should be. I feel like, we all read Shakespeare here and there in the schoolings, our school times. I remember watching a Midsummer Night's Dream in the park, Shakespeare in the Park, a while ago. That was fun, but this is probably my favorite of the Shakespeares. So I got in the mood, because this one's it's about the fairy world. They go into the fairy world, they have a dream in there, and so I wanted to watch an adaptation of that. And I watched this Czech adaptation that's like stop motion, and it kind of reminds me of the stop motions I would watch, of like the Christmas reindeer, Rudolph and Santa Claus, all that stuff. I'm sure you might have seen that at some point growing up, maybe. And it's kind of that type of animation, these puppets, and it's really beautiful stuff. It's just nice to look at. It's a fun, more light version of the story, and definitely recommend it. It's only like an hour and a half or something. It's not like an extraordinary adaptation story wise, but just to see the the craft and the art that goes into this. It's so pretty. The story itself of Midsummer Night Dream, like I appreciate the dream part of it. You know, when they go in the forest, it's fun. But the idea that like the king of fairies, Oberon, like uses the flower to like bewitch and trick people to fall in love and stuff is like a fun little idea. But like it starts off with basically Titania, the queen of the fairies, and Oberon, the king of the fairies, kind of having a little marital spat. What's the word? And they are like kind of broken up, but then like they get back together. So that's like a nice little story, I guess. But it feels like it was all because of Oberon's, along with Puck, the mischievous Puck, taking control of it, really, and like getting their way at the end by using this little flower. So it feels like a little bit too domineering, too patriarchal. Of like the king gets its way at the end, the fairy king, and then I guess there's a marriage here between the Hippolyta and Theseus, because it's kind of based on like Greek mythology, right? That's what this is, one of like basically an adaptation of Greek mythology characters. But what's interesting is the different interpretations, including a queer theory interpretation we're going to get into in a second, that I find that makes this story a little bit more exciting and interesting to me, and then in general, how we can interpret the story. But after this, I wanted to watch another adaptation, because there's several adaptations, but I think one of the better known ones is the Michelle Pfeiffer one. By the way, it's interesting that this one is called, I don't know, this might be a mistranslation, but it's called A Midsummer's Night Dream, as in this is a night dream of the midsummer, versus it's actually a Midsummer Night's Dream, you know. But because this is kind of like an animation, it feels more abstract. It kind of makes sense that like it's the night dream of the midsummer, you know, of the season, you know, an abstract representation of the season that's having this night dream, versus the original title, which is it's a dream that one has during midsummer. And you know, maybe it's a translation error, but that's interesting to note there. Again, so then I watched another adaptation from 1999. Let's pull that up. And it actually has a lot of familiar faces. And this one was adapted in 1999 by Michael Hoffman, and it's like the time period is changed to the early 19th century, is it? Or maybe the late 18th. It's like around time where bicycles became a thing, and I think bicycles became a thing more popular the late 18th century and then leading into the 19th century. And I think it relocates to Italy, I believe. And we got familiar faces. We got Michelle Pfeiffer, we got Kevin Kline, we got Christian Bale, all these people, and it's fun. I enjoy this one too. I think this one, because it's actually, we're seeing actors on screen instead of like these little puppets. It's a little bit more engaging in it, with the the literary aspect of Shakespeare. They actually, the dialogue is it's Shakespearean, of course. And that's another thing. Like, there's some Shakespeare stories that are adapted more loosely, but this is one of the ones that like pretty much directly translates the Old English, onto the screen. And sometimes I could feel a little bit anachronistic, and a little off, and it takes a little getting used to. um but I think it works in this, and like once you're on board with it, and it's just nice to, and also it's nice to watch with subtitles so you can fully grasp everything. It's nice to like hear all the lovely writing from Shakespeare. And I think everyone does pretty good job with performance here. A lot of beautiful faces in this one. And so yeah, so the only thing that's a little odd about it is that, like, because it's adapted to a different time period, everyone still has the same names, and also it's like, I think it's Italy or something, so it's like there's talking in English, Shakespearean English, and like, so it feels a little off in that way. And then like they still hold on to the names, right? So like, Hippolyta and Theseus, they're no longer, or I don't even think they really get into like their backstory. Hippolyta, by the way, is like the queen of the Amazons, is pretty interesting. And Theseus is like an Athens general and stuff. And like, that's the whole thing. They get married to like, as part of like a way to end the war between two nations and stuff, and that's pretty interesting. But because it's a different time period and setting, it kind of like, these characters just have those names without the historical Greek backstory of it all. But if you can get past that, it's a fun adaptation. And I do like Kevin Kline in this. He's playing Bottom, and there's this interesting moment here with the idea of just gender within acting, and how gender is performative. Of course, it's a performance, according to like people like Judith Butler and other theorists. But I think there's been like talk and criticism about the idea of actors performing different genders that they themselves aren't identifying as, which I think is an issue in terms of taking away roles from people, from either queer people or or what have you, which I think is important. I think we should have representation, on and off the screen, and employ people who represent the characters on screen, right? To not make it a caricature, not make it a stereotype. But there's something to the idea as well, as when we're performing, we're not only performing our gender, actors are performing, all aspects of a character. And then so this scene here, including gender, and so I think there's moments in a place for that too, particularly in movies about actors, where I think we should be able to explore that, and allow, some cis actors, or even like the idea of perhaps cis actors exploring with their gender identity, a safe place they can explore that, and this scene here it's got a funny moment where Bottom is like wanting to play every role, and so he's like, oh, I'll play this role, I'll play that role, I'll play the lion, and the leader guy's like, the director's like, no, you should play Pyramus, and then he even at one point he's like, oh, I'll play the female character, what's her name, and I thought that was just interesting how he didn't really see it as a bad thing, he embraced the idea of playing a woman, and like from my perspective, it felt like it wasn't like punching down or looking down at the idea of that, like, oh, like, we can all play with our gender and be gender fluid, at least on stage, and this whole troupe is all just men, by the way. It would be nice, like, I was thinking, like, It would have been nice if they added different, different genders in the cast on this in this theater troupe here, not just all men, to experiment that. Imagine if Bottom was played by, a trans man, for example. That would have been interesting. Investigation and experimentation with gender as he, goes, tries to do every role here. But I thought that was interesting, and again, it also reminds me, last time I talked about that movie, A New Love in Tokyo. There's a scene in there where there was like, it's about sex work, and there was a dominatrix scene, and one of the clients was dressed in pretty much in drag, and there was, I read a critique on Letterboxd, like that someone didn't like that because it was like fetishizing the idea of drag, and I think that has happened, that can happen, and that does happen. But I think like we should again allow the room for people to experiment, whether it's in private, in the bedroom or whatever, or on stage, experiment with gender fluidity. It's similar to drag, basically. When people are in drag, on stage or off stage, it's like they don't particularly have to identify with that gender outside of drag, but they can experiment with it on stage. And so I don't think it's like always. It depends on the context and how it's done, but I don't, particularly in A New Love in Tokyo or in this film, I don't think it's. I don't find it offensive, and I'm speaking as a gender fluid, non-binary individual, but of course other people may disagree with that. But in this instance, I thought that was just an interesting idea here. Anyways, but then like this, okay, so there's also a lot of cool moments here. This is a funny moment. Like this is like 1999, and this like these special effects are really fun. And it still looks good, and the set design, everything, it has like this theatrical aspect to it. It feels a little bit kind of like a theater production, but a little bit more extravagant. But because of the tone of it, there's talking in their Shakespeare language. It all works, and like there's moments here with some of these fairies. They're like these fake creatures, like they have these wings here, right? And these wings look like what you would wear on a stage play. They're not actually like functional wings. They're just almost decorative. But again, like because of like the theatrical dramatic nature of how this all plays out, you kind of get whisked away with the whimsy of it all. And it doesn't take itself too seriously, which I think is fun, because in general, this story, like, it's a comedy story, really. No point of being too serious about it. And I feel like pretty much any Shakespeare adaptation that takes stuff too seriously is gonna just fail. It would have to be adapted in a different way. Especially, if you adapt it with like having direct lines from the play into the movie, then you have to like have a little whimsy and a little camp to it. Otherwise, it just wouldn't make sense. So the whole this whole forest part is fun. So this is the king of Oberon of the fairies. This is curious. Like, are these like his court of fairies? But like, what's up with these women here? They're like sphinx here. Are these supposed to be statues? These are obviously just like hanging out, these fae boys. But like, this feels a little bit concerning. Like, why are the women here? Statuesque, unmoving, and it could be a representative of just, you know, the patriarch versus the matriarch. You know, it doesn't really get into it, of course, but that would be an interesting dissection or revisionist take on it. Like if Oberon, in fact, as I mentioned before, like the whole story of him, like kind of taking control and being in coming on out on top at the end, in pretty much drugging his wife and others for his own desires and because he's vindictive and all that. Like you can, you know, maybe having those women's as statues, I guess, is indicative of the divide here, the power dynamic here. But Pfeiffer's great. And so here's where the queer theory of it all comes in, what I want to get into. So there's I was reading more about this, and I was like wanting to, like, I was looking up, basically I went through a Wikipedia wormhole where, like, I was looking up, are there stories about Hippolyta, the Amazon queen? And I haven't really found anyone like any adaptation of just about Hippolyta. That would be nice to read. And I was also looking into Titania. Does she have a story? Because that would be a cool modern way, like a good idea for any new aspiring fantasy novelist out there. Like maybe, you know, that could be a good writing about Titania, specifically her relationship with one of her followers. Because the whole thing here is that, so they're kind of like broken up, right? And so like she went out, I think she was like in India or something, and like she had a follower from there who was like really devoted to her. They were like really good friends, and you can interpret it as like they were perhaps lovers. And like the follower of her follower passed, I believe, right? And then left her this kid, and so she is now taking care of this kid who's like a changeling from India. And I don't know about this design of the kid. He pretty much looks like a stereotypical, you know, Hindu god or deity. But the idea is here that Oberon wants the changeling, wants this kid for his in his service. Also, look how gay they look. I feel like this is another thing. Like it's almost, you can interpret like this as like Oberon and Puck are lovers too. So that'd be an interesting interpretation. Like that could be, you know, again, inspiration for some fiction writers out there. And we'll also get to another adaptation in a second. But like, so the idea is that like Titania had this potential lover, and that left behind his kid. And so it's like, of course, and it's just, if you look into the dialogue, she kind of refers to her as like, you know, someone she was almost in love with or something. It's hard to find the exact quote, but if we check out this article, let's go back to the internet. Not that one. Queer Theory, A Midsummer Night's Dream from Penn State Center Stage Dramaturgy. So I guess this is some writing based on this production. I wonder if this production actually delved more into this, if it was an adaptation of this. But basically, there's different approaches to this text. This says, and so another approach to the text with Queer Theory may be quick to identify two potentially sapphic relationships with Dream. First, Titania and her votaress, that's who I was talking about. And then also Helene and Hermia, who we'll get into. So this is an interesting article. Definitely check it out if you want to read more about it. But that was really interesting. And like, there's actually, I guess we'll talk about that later. There's an adaptation that on BBC that kind of gets into some of this queer analysis. But like, also Helena and Hermia. So as I was like watching this adaptation, I was like even kind of getting these vibes from it. Before I even read that article, I was like, there's something gay going on here. And part of the article is that kind of points out how like in the dream world, in the forest, is kind of like an analogy for a safe queer world where we go to and we can not be judged and live out our true queer lives, basically, under this dream spell. And then it bookends with more heteronormativity. In the beginning it's about like the potential marriage, or the Theseus and Hippolyta, but then also this character, these two are fighting for the love of this other character, Helena. And like, but then if we go, and it's a typical hetero story, and then it kind of books in with the couples getting together at the end, both of these, but then we get moments like this, and you can kind of interpret this as just like how some women talk to each other, and just in perhaps in this time period, kissing each other was just more of a thing. But it was just interesting to see how delicate and affectionate this kiss is here.
Playfellow. Clark, grant me that Demetrius. Oh.
Like, is this not queer coded or what? And then almost like a potential polycule here going on. But of course that was just friendly girlfriends. But this goes more into it, and how the dialogue, we got like, for her sake, is a repeated phrase that we see. That's Titania, but there's also, in the language used by Helena to describe their bond and acts, blah blah blah. I've noted that Helena's speech invokes the language of marital bonds. Union of two women through the partition the word one, in addition to hands, voices, minds, implying sexual connotations. In the 16th century, sides were synonymous with loins. Interesting. Helena and Hermia's sides merged. So I wonder, could have Shakespeare been putting in some subtext here, for some homoeroticism? This is just this text here is about Helena, Hermia, Titania, and Vortress, but I think that kind of also applies, as I mentioned, to Puck and Oberon, almost, and we could probably scroll through here and find more of that subtext. But I thought that was interesting. And so, of course, like they're real good friends here, these two. And so yeah, so I thought that was interesting. So I feel like, also like the idea of falling in love for the unconventional here. This is all under a spell and stuff, but again, it's placed the idea of like, during this dream sequence, or under spellbound sequence, we're free to love each other. I mean, even look at this. Look at how like he like gets close, like when he's like whispering something to him. It's almost like he's like about to kiss his ear there. I mean, also like in general, like in films and on stage, particularly film, they always put the characters really close to each other for the framing of the shot. Sometimes in reality, people wouldn't get so close when they're talking to each other, but that just adds to the tension here. I don't know. What's that, my love? And so, of course, really fun dialogue here, but it ends back in more of the heteronormativity of it all. The play thing was fun. This is a fun movie. This is a fun little sequence. Of course, they're like supposed to be bad actors, and like, and I guess this is showcasing how this actor, again playing the role of a female here, of a woman, is actually the best actor here, you know. And perhaps, again, we can read that into the fact that, oh, perhaps this actor finds their true self in this role, you know, because they're kind of they're kind of focused on spotlight as the best actor of all of them. I don't know. So there's a lot of queerness to this story that you can take out of it, and so an excellent adaptation, I think, would lean into it. I feel like we're due for another adaptation of Midsummer Night's Dream, and if they do, I think, you know, we should gay it up a little more. Funny enough, there was an adaptation more recently, I think from 2016 for the BBC. Now they really changed it up. I didn't watch this. I just kind of scrubbed through it and I read about it. In this version, Theseus is like a Nazi leader pretty much, and he kidnaps Hippolyta to be his wife. So it's a lot more aggressive, a lot more you know, authoritarian and all that. So this one does lean in more to the politics of it all. And then an interesting adaptation, of course, is that they do introduce more overt queerness in this one. Particularly at the end, the reveal is that pretty much Hippolyta and Titania get together, you know, and they kill Theseus. And so they subvert the ending, you know, instead of giving, because they're portraying Theseus as like the villain in this one. Oberon is kind of not really portrayed that badly. I don't know. I didn't watch it, so I'm just kind of like getting a vibe of what it is by when I was scrubbing through it. And I watched a couple scenes, but it's actually, you know, it's not that great of adaptation. You know, it's not as watchable as perhaps the 1999 version. The production value is also just much lower. It's like a TV miniseries, or it's made for TV, BBC. But what's interesting is that they do adapt it to where at the end here we have Titania and Hippolyta joining together as the victors here, and they have a kiss up there. She gets her own wings, so that's an interesting tale. I just wish there was this. It was just a better made a movie, because it's kind of like just the overall direction and performances are just kind of forgettable, sometimes bad. So from what I've seen, but that's interesting. That's an example of a more revisionist adaptation, and that was 10 years ago, so I think we are due for a new one. Anyways, that's probably my favorite Shakespeare story. What else was I gonna say about that? I don't know. I think that's it. Okay, so then next up, I was doing other stuff, and I like decided to put some movies on the background, and like there's movies that like I've downloaded on my hard drive that I end up not getting to because I either hear not so good things about them or I just am not interested anymore. But then sometimes I just put them on the background while I'm doing chores or whatever, and just to get an idea of it. And one of those was the Ron Howard movie Eden, which has some familiar faces. but this was like a bad movie. I pretty much watched two really bad movies back to back, kind of half-heartedly watching. Horrible performances for the most part. And basically this is a story of like, what if you like put a bunch of like either like libertarian or conservative people on an island, you know, and then create some drama, and it's just not that fun to watch. And most of these characters are just not very appealing. I think maybe Vanessa Kirby's character might be the most interesting of the characters, or more, I guess, the most likable. But again, I was like kind of half watching this, and it just wasn't good. I don't even want to say too much more about it, but it's like one of the few movies I would probably give half a star to. It feels like it's like it was trying to say something interesting with its politics. You know, this poet or this like writer is here on this retreat. You know, it's very individualistic, all about Nietzsche and stuff. Gets confronted with this more libertine character, and then also a conservative couple here. And it doesn't feel as coherent as it wants to be. And just like some poor acting choices, I think, from Jude Law and some of the other actors here. Not really not recommending that at all. And then I put this on Eternity, this other movie. This might be even worse. I mean, this one's actually more watchable, because it's an intriguing premise, the idea of the afterlife, right? This old married couple, you know, dies and goes to the afterlife, and they die at different times, but close enough. And so it builds this whole idea of like what is the afterlife like. And so basically they're like in this limbo where they have to decide what eternity they want to live in, you know. And it's like basically like choosing a vacation package, you know, to different eternities. But as you can see, it's all aesthetically this limbo, and you know, this heaven is very reminiscent of the time period that the couple was from, you know, like the 50s or something, like, or the 60s almost. And like, so it has, you know, it has that vibe, and it's very nostalgic for that period. But it doesn't really investigate what it all means. Why is this what the afterlife is like? You know, why is it like this? You know, is this representative? It's like, it doesn't seem to be indicating that like everyone has their own version when they die, because it's like a bunch of different people all here trying to like pick out, like go on these little previews of these vacations to see which eternity is best for them. And it's all like structured just like it would be in real life. So it's all like hierarchical and reminiscent of just like real world capitalism, where you have to get a job here, and then all the job is all structured like it is in the real world, like the bartender, like it's not like there's no imagination of like a better way of life, or you would think like when you go to heaven, you wouldn't have to be burdened by the typical capitalistic structures of the living world, you know. And then it hints at this idea of like, oh, like maybe like these people here, like, you know, these are like guides guiding them to pick out their eternities. And so like where do they come from? Why were they the ones did they choose for this just job for them, you know, for themselves? And like, who's really in power here? Is there like an authoritarian God out there that's deciding how this all works, like there's no questioning of like how this world works. Why does it work this way? There's the sense of characters maybe rebelling against it, by running away from their eternity. But no one else really questions it. They just like they may dislike it. They may choose to run away from their eternity, and even though it's like a decision, once you've made it, you can't go back. But there's no analysis or even any kind of critical thinking about like why this world is how it is, and like there's no interest. It's like the writer and director has no interest in it. They just want to like put on this like just like relive this nostalgic little moment, and so it feels like there was going to be a twist or something, and I'm going to spoil it pretty much. It feels like there was going to be like a little twist or something about how like, oh, like this seems like a perfect sort of set of circumstances or world where like you get to choose your eternity, but really you're actually in hell, and you're not in like a heaven like situation. Their eternities aren't heaven. But then it ends with them running away, choosing their eternity, and their eternity ends up being just the boring suburban American dream life, like nuclear family life pretty much. And so it's not even self-aware of it. Like no one's even being critical of the idea that like, this idea of happiness is based on a fractured American dream that is dependent on imperialism and dependent on exploiting the poor and stuff. It doesn't even like, and of course in this world it's all like it's a I guess represented as fantasy, but it doesn't it's not like, it doesn't examine like the whole structural aspect of it, or it doesn't even self-reflect on why we have these fantasies, and like people like this, like we have no insight about why this character is working all the time as the clerk at this theater of memories. He seems like he's miserable, but no one really cares, and like, does he decide that he's just not gonna have an eternity for himself? Is he punished or something? I don't understand. Like, he decided to work here forever like this. It's like no one's like questioning the reality of this, and so it feels just like nostalgia trap. But so it's, if there are like little nods to like certain freedoms, like here's some queer freedom here. You can go back and do some go back to the Roaring 20s, but then have it be with less Nazis and stuff, or the Roaring 40s. I don't know. But it feels like it's presenting all this like from the perspective of like a neoliberal dream, really. And then I guess like the most neoliberal thing is there's that moment where she's taking, this is Elizabeth Olsen, of course. She's trying to decide what she's gonna do, because it's all about like her. She came here with her husband, but she had a previous husband who died in the war and stuff. And also they treat the Korean War like very from a jingoistic perspective of one of the forgotten great wars that without really acknowledging really what the Korean War was about and what it means, or even like criticizing the idea of war. It kind of just like makes it out to be like a good heroic thing that he that America went to war in Korea, so here's like probably one of the more offensive things, particularly to Marxists, where basically these are like sold out, closed dream worlds. Obviously, this is a funny one. Clown World, no, there's no more capacity. This discontinued. No one wants to go to Clown World anymore. But then Marxist World is gone, and it's interesting that they put Marxist World. It's like that it's no longer admitting anybody, and apparently people are stuck there, and it implies that a Marxist world becomes dystopic or something. And it's not even like I would understand like if it was like, Stalin world or something, or something more like authoritarian tanky world or something. But like Marxist world, it feels a lot more broad idea of just anti-capitalism, socialism. So it's like to kind of put that in the background as like a failed utopia, as saying like, oh no, that's no longer in vogue, and there's better eternities that people want now, like the suburban one that was, I guess this might be the one they go to, Simple Afterlife. That one's discontinued as well. But these other ones are just more like vacations, but it kind of lumps them all together. Like it's just as unappealing as the simple world there, Marxist world. So I feel like this comes from a very like neoliberal perspective, perhaps, a liberal who votes Democrat, but is still entrenched in the idea of capitalist realism, that's the best we can do. And so a lot of these, just the whole structuring of this limbo of like that replicates contemporary relations of service work to kind of sell people, what is the best eternity, what's the best eternity they can go to. There's this whole like everyone's trying to like shill their worlds, like come to infantilization land, come to such and such land. It feels like a very cynical view of the afterlife that doesn't really care to go in depth or even self-aware about itself. I don't know. So like just politically, I feel like this is like an uninspired, kind of lazy, nostalgic take, and as if like there's a weird twist waiting to happen to kind of crumble this all down, but it doesn't really, like it would have been more interesting if like I said, like if the machinations behind all this were revealed, and there was maybe this was like the devil or even God himself or themselves or whatever was behind all this, and they rebel, and then the characters rebel against that or something. But I think it's more interested in appealing to the kind of couple that is represented in this movie, an older couple who has nostalgia for the 60s or 50s or whatever, like a Mad Men types. So it's kind of just boring in that way. And and also having like this actor here, what's his name? John Early, like making him his story and in a hetero romance at the end. Feels a little bit like gay erasure, even though there's little nods here and there to some other gay characters. Like one of the side characters is a lesbian, but again, it's kind of just like little nods to it, you know, in the background, almost tokenizing. Well, of course, the traditional heterotypical suburban life is at the center as like the dream that we all want or something, you know, which just feels like a very dated concept to end it on, you know. And of course, you know, there is an appeal to living not in the city, for example, but like to not like grapple with it, or to not be a little bit more critical of its characters. It just feels like propaganda at the end, you know, like it feels like neoliberal propaganda, if not conservative. So I just thought that was just like a shitty movie. And I was like, you know, I was like half watching it. Something I was like probably not half watching it. I was like interested enough because I wanted to see. I was hoping there was like a fun twist or something. But anyways, that's enough talking about that. That's eternity. It was an eternity of me talking about it. And then like I then I put this later on, and this is Threesome, and so like this one was a movie that came out last year as well, and I didn't expect too much from it. It even starts off again like kind of just like a generic rom-com movie, and it has a provocative title, The Threesome, of course. And so you kind of suspect, oh, this is going to be about, you know, a polycule, or, you know, the consequences of some young people having a threesome. But they're actually not super young. I think they're all mostly in their 30s. I think one of the characters is actually in their 20s, but these are the main couple, Zoe Deutsch and this guy. What's his name? Jonah Joaquin. And so, you know, it starts off in this wedding. So I feel like we've seen this a lot. It starts off at a wedding. Some interesting personalities. And then it gets to the crux of it all when they have a threesome, pretty much, right? And it's not that salacious, really. It's not that like, you know, gratuitous or even like erotic or anything. It's more just a matter of fact. And it just starts there, and then the consequences follow, right? So it's not really so much about the threesome, but more about the consequences of it. And I found the story actually quite well told and and overall, I think the script was really good. The twists and turns that it goes through, and it's not entirely like super surprising what happens, but it's still pretty engaging. I think the actors all do a pretty good job. Ruby Cruz does a good job as well. She's like kind of like the third wheel situation, but really it's about them too. And I thought, and what's interesting also is that like I feel like maybe a rare example of a male love interest straight guy character who's like actually a nice guy without it feeling like too unrealistic. Like it is, he is a bit too nice sometimes. Sometimes maybe a little bit boring, but like it's like a good archetype of like perhaps an ideal with still without it being too fantastical of like what a nice boyfriend would be like, right? You would want, in a relationship, understanding, has, is conventionally attractive, has some humor to him, but isn't arrogant, isn't like, domineering, and is genuinely in love. And then, there's the whole conflict that arises when the consequences of that threesome happen. So we're gonna go into spoilers here, but in general, also I think if it was just him as the main central character, it may have been not as interesting. But I think Zoe Deutsch's character here adds a lot more humor to it, and just her character is really interesting. Probably the best character of the movie. We get to see just her range here. And again, she's like, kind of a messy character too. She's somewhat likable, but also, also not always. And it is a good foil for him, who's kind of like the more of a standard nice guy. So I thought the relationship felt authentic to me too as well, and it felt nice and felt fun and interesting to watch. It wasn't like, it didn't feel cheesy at all. So, and it was surprisingly interesting. Like if I had watched this before I did my top list of the year, this at least would have probably been an honorable mention, and then also it's like okay, so it's pretty much like a rom-com dramedy, similar to what you would see from like maybe a Judd Apatow movie a couple 10 years ago or so or more, but updated to contemporary times, including, along with the characters feel more contemporary, but also like the even contemporary politics that isn't really too in the center of the film, but the idea of just like, restrictions, for example, okay, this might be a little bit of spoilers, restrictions in abortion accessibility, like it's stuff like that are acknowledged in this movie, that of course you wouldn't see back in the day, because that was before Roe v. Wade was overturned. So like it's not afraid to talk about all that, but still like focusing on this love story and the complications of a third party. So let's get more into little spoilers, but I would recommend this if you're into what I just said. So basically, she gets pregnant and the other person gets pregnant too, which is interesting. It's very, the structure of it I think is really well done, because like we get that she gets pregnant and then she of course feels like it's not time to have a baby, but then eventually she's like, oh, you know what, let's have it. And so, again, also showcasing, the nice guy character here of like, having it be her decisions, like, hey, like I think we should have it, but it's up to her. She's the one having the baby. So again, it's not like an abusive story. Some of these stories, when it comes to like, having kids, or when abortions are involved, for example, sometimes we get the abusive boyfriend or something, or angry boyfriend who's much more aggressive about what he wants. This is more just feels a little bit, I guess feels a little bit cozier in that way. The love is definitely cozier than a lot of other love stories, maybe. But but it doesn't. It's not like it may not be as triggering, to some people, you know. So I think that's, I guess, an appealing aspect of the movie that is surprisingly not very triggering. I don't know. But so then, then the surprise is that like the other girl they slept with is also pregnant. And so that's the big thing really. It's like, okay, like he wanted to start, they wanted to start this life, and now with a kid with this girlfriend, and now this other girl who they were just having a fun night with isn't meant to be serious, is going to be a big part of their life now, right? So now they're like have to decide. They break up. They're like, it's everything's topsy-turvy. And then, but I think, Ruby Cruz does a good job here. She's the younger one, and she comes from more religious family. So then the comedy of him having to interact with the two or basically just a family of the other girl. What's her freaking name? Jenny. So Jenny, and then Connor's this guy. Olivia is Zoe Deutsch. So like the whole conflict there, I think it really gets you invested in the story. And there's the dynamic too, like, of Jenny being like, also kind of being like the nice girl version of Connor. And so you would think they're kind of more compatible. But not really. And like, and then her being more of the sardonic character, who's a lot, more fun to watch in a lot of ways, and so, but I thought, I think the performances were really good. The comedy, also this side character, he is kind of like this guy's kind of playing like the gay best friend, but I think he does a good job with his comedic timing. Like, surprisingly, a lot of funny moments here with all this whole crew of characters. And so I don't know, I found this very endearing, a lot of these characters here, this scenario here. Again, the main character here of Connor, the main guy character, maybe feels a little bit too idealistic as the good boyfriend, even though he has his moments, of course, like we see him being, he's still like very human, authentic in a lot of ways, in how his reactions here. But again, I feel like his characterization is a little softer, to the point where I feel like it's a little bit, I think, maybe more appealing to some viewers, because he maybe is more of an ideal type of a boyfriend character, and having, I think, the women be a lot more central in the narrative, and giving them agency to like kind of lead the narrative, makes this movie a lot of more, like, I think, more accessible to maybe certain rom-com fans like myself, I guess, who probably aren't so interested in seeing maybe another story of an asshole boyfriend, high school. But again, like, it all depends on how it kind of depends on like how much you can buy this character of Connor or not. But I think either way, like, it's gonna be like, Zoe Deutsch does such a good job. It's gonna be still, and even her sister does like a lot of, I think it's kind of like an underrated rom-com of the year, perhaps. I feel like no one really talks about this one, Threesome. And maybe the title and the premise kind of put some people off. I guess one of the major criticisms is this ending here. I feel like the ending of the revelations here was a little bit rushed, or something a little bit too quick. But It's not that big of a thing. And I guess another thing I like about it is just that it feels like, in general, kind of an unconventional dramedy story, but still like endearing and heartwarming in a way, you know. Like, you know, they end up being friends at the end, you know, and so that, you know, there is a story. There's also another issue with movies about, you know, pregnancy and love, and introducing the idea of abortion. A lot of times, most movies, unless they're like super serious movies, it always ends up where the character decides to go through with the pregnancy, you know. And that's kind of partly due to the narrative of a story of a story of like, if they did do the abortion, they would have, it changed the story, and it kind of just like ends things. Where if you go through the pregnancy, then it prolongs the conflict in the story, you know. And so, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like an anti-abortion film at all, you know. Some of those, you know, some movies, when the characters ends up deciding not to get an abortion, do kind of feel like anti-choice, but it just doesn't come off that way. And I think, you know, again, it shows the moment where she goes and is about to get the abortion and everything, and she decides to take more time to think about it. And again, it brings to light the you know, she calls out the fucking hellscape we live in, where she has to drive to Illinois. I think they filmed this in Arkansas, but like, I'm not sure where it takes place, but they have to drive far away, you know, a different state, to get the abortion, you know. Just another aspect of contemporary modern life now. And so, you know, it does end in a sweet note. They do get together, but it kind of feels, and again, it's not like super, you know, a happy ending either, happy-go-lucky, like, because it ends up that, you know, the baby was actually not his, but then the one that is his is from the girl he doesn't want to be with, you know, long term. So it's like, there's like a bittersweet element to it, but then again, it's like, maybe it doesn't matter so much whether it's technically biological or not. And then yeah, and then it seems like, you know, they're gonna end up together, but also it's like, it's kind of just kind of saying how, like, it's not that easy, and that it's always going to be complicated, and we're always going to have this complication, this memory of what happened, and it's not a perfect bow, but we can still find some happiness to it with, you know, and like, you know, it ends here. Like, who knows where it'll go, you know. Maybe you can speculate, you know, that, you know, eventually they'll break up again or something. I don't know. But the point is that, like, it kind of ends like in a moment of like, we have to, you know, the unexpected happens, and sometimes you just have to do the best you can with what you got, you know. And they kind of, you know, they also kind of forgive each other for all the stuff, and like, it's part of the idea of just like enjoying and seeing the happiness in what you do have, you know, versus of what could have been, you know. I don't know, I found it to be a sweet story. It even, you know, it is a very hetero story for the most part, you know, but again, it doesn't feel like propaganda, like like the other movie Eternity. And yeah, what else was I gonna say about? Oh, another cool thing about this movie is the ending bloopers. You don't see bloopers anymore. When was the last blooper reel you saw? So that this adds a little bit more to the fun aspect of the movie, besides the comedy of the whole movie. You know, having bloopers, like, just it's always a fun way to end it. You know, in the credits. You know, it really gives you the idea of like how fun it was to make the movie with people there, and like, you know, it's always nice to see that, you know, when people are actually having a good time making the movie, and then just ends it on a happy note. And we actually get to see an extra little bit. It almost feels like a deleted scene here of like ending it with another wedding, this time I guess indicating that they do get married. Olivia and Connor, and we see that Jenny's there too, you know, the sisters, and Jenny's there with the baby as well. So it's like, you know, they're all friends, you know, and like it's a happy, super happy ending with the wedding. And it's kind of funny because this scene it feels like an extra little epilogue, but it's played with the bloopers, so we get the little moment here.
Connor and Olivia and his baby mama all got together.
Oh no.
Where like they kind of laugh at each other, so it almost feels like a blooper, even though it's kind of like an epilogue. So it's just a funny way to ending it there, and like, and so like you kind of understand why like maybe this would have been too much of a cute button at the end to have it part of the movie, you know, not in the credits.
Oh no.
And so I think kind of works better as a deleted scene. But then also it's nice to like still have it here, so you can kind of like see, oh look, like they married and stuff, and it's gonna be happily ever after almost. I don't know. So I feel like it's like a feel good movie for sure. So I thought that was cool. That was it. That's the movies. I mean, I did watch more War and Peace. I am planning to keep watching War and Peace. So last time I watched part 1, this is the like 1966 Soviet version. And this is part 2, and this is just not as good as the first part. And I guess I was a bit naive about the story. Like this kind of focuses on Natasha, this part of the story, and I was kind of thinking that she would get, you know, married, and the love story between her and Pierre would kind of happen when she was a little older, you know, and they were just teasing it. And I was thinking like, oh, but they'll probably, you know, do this whole courting sequence when she was older. But apparently in the book, she was like started as like, again, I didn't read the book, but apparently from what I read, like she was like 13 in the beginning, and then she's like I think maybe 16 around this point. And then eventually at the end, she's like 28 or something. But of course, this kind of, I guess, representative of the time period of the aristocracy of Russia back here. You know, typically the wife is always much younger. Though in the book, apparently the Pierre character is not Pierre. What's his name? Andre, the Andre character, Andre and Natasha. So Andre is supposed to be like in his mid-20s or something, which is still like a bigger age gap than we would want, right? But like, he looks like this. I don't know how old this actor is, but this actor kind of looks like he could be in his 40s, maybe 30s. He has so the age gap difference is a little bit more pronounced here, it would seem. Maybe he's in his 30s, I don't know, but like still, like, but then this actress, I think she's in her early 20s, but she looks really young. She looks like, you know, she could be 16 or something. And so this whole section of the story just feels a little bit, because of that, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. And then in general, like, I just think that like this probably just feels like a little bit of a filler segment. This whole part 2, and then particularly this part. She's just dancing here after a hunt with the dogs. It feels like it, and again, like, she may not. It's hard to say if it's more the direction or the acting, but it feels like this performance is probably maybe the weakest part of this whole movie. It feels like they just told her to like smile and smile some more. Like this whole sequence here, a little bit before here, they're eating. Like, it's just like it keeps cutting back to her, and she just, all she does is smile and has some doe eyes sometimes. Like, that's pretty much every time. She just has barely any dialogue in this sequence. I don't know. So a lot of this feels very filler, and like she does get a little bit more better performance here when she's like, you know, suffering. See, look, like, I don't want to like really get too much into someone's appearance, but he looks like he's much older than she. So but it's still like a beautifully shot film. You know, look at this. Like this really soft focus, beautiful stuff, beautiful costumes, all the beautiful stuff. So it's nice to look at, you know. Of course, this is a moment where she kind of, this guy seduces her, and so Andre was like, "Oh, I'll marry you in a year." You know, at least he was like, "Let's wait a year. You know, let's wait until you get a little older." And so in that meantime, this guy seduces her, and so it's kind of framed as almost like, you know, she succumbed to this trickster character, who's really just all for just self-centered, right? Not really loving her at all, just kind of infatuated with her. And I don't know if I'm sure the book there's more details about this, but it does feel a little weird how quickly she falls for him. Again, she is like a child in here, so I guess it kind of makes somewhat sense that, you know, a girl might quickly fall in love with somebody who's showing so much affection and attention to her, especially when she's waiting so long for her engagement, you know. But it still feels like they could have spent a little more time building up that relationship there, to make the impact a little more. But she does do a good job here, as her crying scenes are pretty good. So I don't think it's totally her acting that ruins the whole movie. It's mostly just some of the filler sequences and some of the choices they make. But it's just this in comparison to part 1, which was a lot more bombastic, a lot, you know, felt a lot more epic. This is probably just feels like a weak point in the story. You know, this probably was the peace point. It's not, and yeah, like the war scenes last time, like, make it feel really epic, but it's not just that. It was like the introspective nature of the characters, you know, questioning and about their existential life, their existence, and questioning everything in part 1, particularly Andre's character. There's a little bit of that here, where she's you know, at her home with her brother, I think. where we do a little bit more insight on her psyche, but I feel like it's not quite enough. And again, maybe because we are following, you know, this young girl character, maybe it's more of a stereotypical viewpoint of a girl, in comparison to the last part where it was Andre, who's feels like he's a little bit more developed, you know. So he, you know, it is interesting just them discussing different things and dreams and stuff. There's some interesting moments here and there, but overall, yeah, this felt like a more of a mediocre version of what I expected, you know, after watching part 1. And then the BBC series is kind of still consistently okay. We do get some other angles here. I think, you know, I think Lily James here does a good job here. Perhaps overall she gets more screen time, and does feel like she has more development here versus the 1966 movie. So, you know, her Natasha, I think, is a more interesting character. You know, we get to see the Pierre character actually being joining the Masons, the Freemasons. This chapter, the Freemasons. So that's some other stuff we get to see. So we get to see a little more Pierre here, kind of struggling and figuring out like what he can do to better himself, you know. He's not really too self-aware about his class privilege, or maybe he is a little bit. I don't know. It's interesting to see where his character goes, you know. And then there's a whole gambling sequence here. There's a dance, but yeah, it's a hit or miss. This BBC adaptation, I guess, in different ways than the film. And we get more. We get it feels like a more different characters. Like we don't like this character. We don't really get too much of her in the 1966 version. But I don't really love her characterization. You know, she feels more like a archetypical, you know, conniving, hedonistic character. But yeah, that's that. Well, I'm gonna keep watching. I might take a break from the War and Peace because this one does end in 1812 time period within the narrative, and I'm doing like, as I said, I'm trying to watch like literary adaptations, and I think I might watch Wuthering Heights, a couple Wuthering Heights next week. And that takes place in England, I believe, or in the UK, and that's in 1801-02, which is when War and Peace begins around. So I'm thinking of doing that, and then the following week come back to War and Peace. I imagine War and Peace goes for a few decades at least, maybe 2 decades. I don't know. It started 1801, then part 2 ended at 1812. It might even go to like 1820. I don't know. And if it keeps up that pace, and then at that point I might watch, like, I think I think Pride and Prejudice takes place like in 1812 or something, or 1820. I don't know, something like that. So I'm thinking of like watching these movies, these adaptations in the order of the time period. So we'll see. So this is kind of like a long term, medium term curriculum of literary adaptations I'm watching. I want to do. I'm gonna do that. I want to do. I want to do the Bronte sisters, Wuthering Heights, and then Jane Eyre as well. Emma and Pride and Prejudice, I think, are Jane Austen. And then maybe another one, just to round that off. I guess it's mostly just the Regency era, right? The Regency era, Russia would be, you would have a different terminology for that. I don't know what is it, some Tsar era. But yeah, that's what I've been watching. But you know what? I've also been reading some more. I was gonna talk about this earlier, but I guess we'll have a little reading section. So I've been trying to keep my my Storygraph account updated. I'm always referencing my Letterboxd account, but I got a Storygraph account too at Moonbath. And so this is what I've been reading. So I've been getting into Ursula K. Guin, and I linked on socials. I linked her short story, "The Day Before the Revolution," because I want to get into the Hanish cycle. I don't think I'll read all of the Hanish cycle. I'm gonna read the big ones. Pretty much on my list this is a short story that's like an introduction to it, and then I'm gonna read. I'm just started The Dispossessed, and then I'm gonna read The Word for World is Forest. Just kind of like people have compared that to what pretty much saying that like Avatar is kind of a ripoff of that. And then I'm gonna end it with Left Hand of Darkness, which is another one of her well-known books, and then from there, I might end up bringing more, but I am liking her writing a lot. I mean, I tried. I did read The Dispossessed like I started reading it a while ago, like almost read like almost half of it, and then I just kind of lost interest because it's kind of like it's a little, it's not dense, but it has a lot of heft to it because it's a sci-fi book that's like about these two worlds, right? One that's kind of based on more capitalistic world that we live in, and then the moon is an anarchistic society, and so it's very, they're both alien though, right? They're both different from our Earth, so it's like explain like the book explaining like how they're different and like all different aspects is very interesting, but it's also like a lot to take in, and there's different, it bounces back and forth between the two different planets, and the main character is kind of like a fish out of water story too, which makes it kind of interesting as well. But there's a lot to take in, and also it's like, because I know that Ursula is like wrote this book to kind of examine what a utopian anarchistic world would look like, and perhaps maybe even some of its flaws as well. I heard about people describe this as not a perfect anarchistic world. It's interesting to read into the subtext of what she's saying and like what she's trying to say with the different scenarios and how she describes things. And then just the world building is very interesting. So a lot of sci-fi or fantasy books that have that are heavy on the world building can be a little bit somewhat dense and make it a little bit more of it harder to read, right? but it's not. I feel like there's a lot denser books, and I think the prose in general is well written and engaging enough to kind of pull you through. But I think when I first started reading it, I just wasn't in the headspace. And now that, like, you know, this was like when I started reading it, when I first read it, it wasn't that long ago. Maybe it was like before the pandemic. I don't know, but like I feel like now, like I'm a little bit more educated on different political philosophies and anarchism and stuff, that like it's a lot more interesting to me now than before, maybe. And so I just started reading it, but before that, I did read The Ones Who Walk Away from Lust, which is actually like probably the best starting point for Ursula K. Le Guin, because that kind of leads into The Day Before Revolution, because this story kind of takes place. There's even a forward or an intro in the short story where she talks about how, like, this is about the people. This is a kind of a follow-up to that, about someone who walked away from Omelas. And Omelas is like, it's a society that, like, if you read this, it's also recommended, you know, you should probably read that too. Like, it's just a short story. You might have even read it for school or something, but like, it's a society that's like, it's like a seemingly utopia society that, you know, is dependent on the suffering of an individual. And so it's like, what does it mean? And like, is it worth it to have all this beautiful utopic society, but then at the expense of one person's suffering? So it's like, you know, do you walk away from it, you know, or do you seek to change it somehow? And like, it would appear that her analysis of her own writing is that, like, the thing you got to do is to walk away from that society. Of course, there's been different analysis, and there's even, you know, there's different takes on it. You know, I feel like it might be better to, I think it might, walking away from Omelas might be an escapist interpretation, right? It is almost just as bad as staying, because you're not really changing anything, right? But I think her interpretation is really that, like, you know, it's just a metaphor. Walking away means not participating, you know. But then to go a step further is probably the ideal thing, really, is for a true revolution is to abolish the system and rebuild, you know. And so in a way, you can see that in her following short story. Really, she wrote actually the short story that I'm talking about here after The Dispossessed, but this is positioned as a prologue to The Dispossessed, because it's basically about a revolutionary in her old age now, who is pretty much one of the founders of this revolution, this movement, anarchistic movement, who is revolting against this, you know, capitalist society, this, you know, society of property owners and stuff, you know, and so it's a view through her perspective on the eve of this revolution, really. Like there's a big revolt that happens, and, you know, they're gonna start the actual revolution the next day on, well, actually they're going to start a general strike as well. So that's kind of tying into what we were talking about in the beginning of this episode of Moonbath Chats, and how they're going to do a general strike, and they're going to properly secede from the capitalist system and start their own world. And basically we see in The Dispossessed that they basically they go to the moon and they establish their own anarchistic society there, you know. And so this is the day before it really sparks off, you know, and it's through the perspective of Oda, who is the founder of this movement, pretty much. And what's interesting about this story is that there's references to like the anarchist philosophy in the books she's written, her being imprisoned, because of her views and stuff. And remembers about that, remembers, her lover, her husband who died, because of these revolutionary acts she did, her, and like, but it's from the perspective of her now, like, I think, is she in like in her 80s? I forgot the exact age she's in, but she's a, it kind of implies that it's her last day, before she passes. And then, but the interesting part is that like it's not really about the inner workings and of a revolutionary. It's more about her personal introspection on her life, seeing the youth around her and feeling a sense of joy that like, oh, these young people are gonna benefit from the fruits of my labor and stuff. But then also it's like almost also like self-critical of herself, like maybe do I what's my purpose at this point? And then also like maybe she feels that like maybe they're idolizing her too much, and but then also she talks about her weaknesses as a character, her love life, her interests, and then, but I think it's a really well told story about aging as well, about time and how time wears on us. And I think it's like perhaps essential reading for anyone interested in revolutionary figures, but also just revolutionary in general, particularly for anarchists, but I think also for communists or socialists who maybe lean more towards Marxist ideas than anarchist ideas, because it's not very similar. You can change the wording and call her socialist, or in some of her writings and stuff, you can fudge some little things here and there, and pretty much still represents any type of leftist revolutionary. Her character represents that. So I think it's a good story. Again, it's about her, really about her perspective. So it's not really it's not like an Andor or something where we are in the middle of like a revolutionary armed struggle or something. It's not about like spycraft or anything. It's a very personal story, and I think it's really well done. And it's a short story. It's like 20 some pages. How many pages is it? You could pretty much read it in under 26 pages. You can read it in under an hour. I also listened to the audiobook as well. I was like reading it and then audiobooking it at the same time. And that's also pretty good. And so here's a link to you can actually download it for free here on the storyoftheweek.loa.org. Let's put it up on screen. There's the link there. I don't know too much for this website, but this website was linked from the Wikipedia article. I imagine they have a bunch of free stories you can look up, and you can also get it at your library. I imagine it's part of one of the collections of her short story collections. The Wind's 12 Quarters collection is that one. Also, Those Who Walk Away from Almolas is also part of that. But even if you're not going to read The Dispossessed, I think this is definitely a good place a good thing to read. Especially if you like stuff like stories like Andor or any revolutionary stories or stories about revolution, or sci-fi, really. And it's interesting, and it's also like it's just like a good, a good prologue for the book, for the Dispossessed. So it's like, you like that, you might want to watch this, might want to read Dispossessed, and that's what I'm doing. So I'll probably talk more about this one in a month or two whenever I get around to finishing it. I'm at a good pace. I think I could probably finish it in a month. Anyway, so it's like, what's interesting is that a story like this, Ursula K. Guin's stories, it's somewhat surprising that her sci-fi novels haven't really been as adapted or in the mainstream as like something like Dune or something like Lord of the Rings or whatever. That's more fantasy, or something like I feel like you would think her stories would be more well known or even adapted by Hollywood, but it also kind of makes sense too, because she is very much clear about her anti-capitalist views, and within her stories, are very strongly, particularly Dispossessed, is very much about anarchism, about anti-capitalism, juxtaposing the two worlds. And so I imagine that would probably be upsetting to a lot of, or unappealing to any of the big studios that are producing stuff. So it's like, I guess that makes sense. So it's kind of sad that these stories don't get that big screen treatment, and maybe they will at some point. Something like Dune is interesting because it challenges the hero narrative. But it's very, even though like you can read anti-AI, anti-authoritarian concepts from it, get ideas from it, it is rooted in a sort of anti. It can be read as a libertarian type of view too, as well as this, because Frank Herbert was an anti-statist. Of course, it was an anti-authoritarian general. So he, voted Republican because he was very much about small or limited government, which was kind of like, he's kind of like the right-wing version of Ursula K. Le Guin, who was also anti-state, but as an anarchist is about community as well, is about freedom. There's a line in Dispossessed about how, freedom, part of freedom is being responsible for one another. That's what gives us freedom, having that responsibility to other people. Because then we can be free to pursue our desires and wants when we feel like we're cared for, and there's some, there's empathy among our community, and people take care of each other instead of being self-reliant on our own, or instead of being super individualistic and only caring for ourselves. Then we're burdened by that, instead of lifting that burden by being more communal and providing for one another and helping and mutual aid, all that stuff. That enables us to be more free. While Herbert is kind of the opposite. It feels like, no, we can't rely. We shouldn't teach people to be relying on the state or other people, but be self-reliant on ourselves. And I feel that just leads down to just, libertarian nonsense that is very self-centered and egotistic. So so I guess it's not surprising that something like Dune gets adapted, while something like Dispossessed does not. Even though I think you can still kind of, as an anarchist text, it could be appealing to even a lot of more right-leaning people, because it's very anti-state, So, maybe we'll see that in the future, but that's just something I was thinking about. Like, to this point, I think a lot more of the revolutionary stories are still more easily accessible in literature with books and stuff. you know. So yeah, that's what I've been reading. I've been reading other stuff. Maybe I'll talk about other stuff. I'm not gonna become a booktube channel. I think we're gonna still focus on movies and TV because it's just easier to talk about because it's more short form. And there's no way I have 276 in my to read list. There's no way I'm gonna be able to talk about all this stuff at a reasonable length. I mean, you know, I guess it depends. If there's like a book that that stands out that I'm really into, I might talk about it here. We'll see. We did talk about this short story today. But yeah. We'll see how the channel evolves. But that's gonna pretty much do it for this time. That was close to 2 hours, damn. What else? I think that's it. We'll see how long I'll keep this up. This is like, I don't know how many. Is this like the 6th or 7th or so, 5th maybe? I don't know, probably more than that week of every Sunday release a video. You know, I used to do these I used to edit my videos. But then that meant I would sometimes just release a video every other month or something. But this channel is like always in flux. It's, you know, it's just like a little art project I'm doing for myself. More of a sort of like public diary, really. And don't expect me to always be doing it on a regular basis. We'll see. I feel like I'm thinking if I watch Wuthering Heights this week, I might do a video. I might keep up with the videos next week. At some point, surely other things will get in the way. It's kind of, you know, at this point, it's kind of like it's a habit now. It's like, oh yeah, it's Sunday, gotta record this thing, gotta record what I've been watching and stuff. But I could have also used these 2 hours to read more of The Dispossessed, for example. You know, I thought I was doing, when I first started doing these long form videos, I was like, I'm gonna do it once a month, every full moon. So I don't know, that might happen at some point. We might do a monthly thing, I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, I'll see you next time, whenever that is. Let me know what you've been up to in the comments. Bye bye.